Psalm 56. Be gracious to me, O God, for man tramples on me. All day long an attacker oppresses me. My enemies trample on me all day long, for many attack me proudly. When I am afraid, I put my trust in you, in God, whose word I praise. In God I trust. I shall not be afraid. What can flesh do to me? All day long they injure my cause. All their thoughts are against me for evil. They stir up strife. They lurk. They watch my steps as they have waited for my life. For their crime will they escape? In wrath cast down the peoples, O God. You have kept count of my tossings, put my tears in your bottle. Are they not in your book? Then my enemies will turn back in the day when I call. This I know, that God is for me. In God, whose word I praise, in the Lord, whose word I praise. In God I trust. I shall not be afraid. What can man do to me? I must perform my vows to you, O God. I will render thank offerings to you, for you have delivered my soul from death, yes, my feet from falling, that I may walk before God in the light of life. This is God's word. Let's pray. Lord, I praise you right now that as we come before your word, we use these words to comfort our hearts, but also to see our troubles in a new light. Give us a godly perspective, O Lord, for whatever may come. Help us to look to you for all things. Help us to seek your will in every situation. Bless your people now, O Lord. Bless us as we submit ourselves to you, to your word, and to your will. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Well, I have to admit something to you this morning. I'm often coming up here to confess, aren't I? This is good because it's cheaper than, going to a counselor or something. I have to admit something. My life does not always reflect my confession of faith. It just doesn't. My life does not always look like it should based upon what I say I believe and what I say I think is good, right, and true. My actions can betray my words. How about you? I think when we think about that and we're honest with ourselves, we can see that at some time or another, all of us find ourselves in that kind of a situation where we say one thing, we say what we believe, or we have in the past at least, and then we come to a moment where we're not actually living like we believe what we say we believe. Even this coin right here, right? This is just a regular quarter. And on a quarter, we have a confession of faith, as we do on all of our money in the United States. It says, in God we trust. In God we trust. That is a statement of faith. And yet, we put that on our currency, and yet as a country, we don't always live like we believe that, do we? We say, in God we trust, we say words, and yet our actions actually betray our words. Now, this is not something that I say just so we all can feel bad about ourselves today, right? Because that's sometimes how it can make us feel. We can go, you're right. I say things, and then I act a different way, or I'm in the midst of a situation, and maybe I don't trust God the way that I say that I do trust God. We know it's true. We don't like it, but what can I do when I find myself in these kinds of moments? Or what can I do when I recognize that I was in a situation where I was not actually trusting God the way that I say I normally do? Now, we just read Psalm 56, and just upon plain reading, some things might jump out at us. Upon plain reading, we see, okay, this is another type of lament psalm, a psalm where something bad has happened to David, right? He has people oppressing him and attacking him, but we know David, he's a man of faith, and so he says, but I trust in you, God. I know that you will vindicate me. I know that you will justify me. You will bring about justice, and I can trust in you. And there's some repetition throughout this psalm. Verse 4 is repeated then in verse 10. And we see this repetition about, I'm trusting you, God. I'm trusting your word. I will not be afraid. What can man do to me? And when we read that, in a sense that makes us go, yeah, good for you, David. But in another sense, it might make us go, man, that just isn't my experience all the time. Because sometimes my experience when I go through a hardship, when I go through trouble, when I go through persecution, I don't automatically go, God is for me and God is going to succeed. I might slump down and feel like God doesn't care, or God has left, or what am I going to do to get myself out of this? And sometimes when we read passages like this, maybe what we end up doing is making the people that wrote this, making King David into some kind of hero, but a hero that it's unattainable. Right? We can paint people as if they're just these comic book heroes. But when we look at ourselves in light of them, we can feel pretty puny. But this is where it's helpful for us to have a good view of the background and to remember that David, great King David, a man after God's own heart, really is just a man like us. That he's not a super comic book hero. He's a person that struggles with his faith. He's a person who struggles with trust. He's a person that says he believes things and yet acts differently at times. And I think it's helpful for us to do this because we can't just say, be like David, have faith, and everything will work out. Because in our everyday experience, that's hard and it's impossible. And we're going to fall short of that. But I think this morning, that's the point. Is that God knows the human heart. God knows how frail we are. God knows that those kinds of struggles are going to cut us down so deep that at times it's going to be hard for us to jump up and say, no matter what, I'm going to trust God through this. Sometimes we fall down and cry. But that's a part of the Christian life as well. So I want us to remember the background to Psalm 56 before we look at it. Because I think when we remember the background of it, it gives us a little bit different perspective on it. There's a clue at the top right there. Your Bible will have a little note to the choir master, right? And then underneath it, it says, this is when the Philistines seized him at Gath. And so we find this event in 1 Samuel chapter 21. So turn with me to 1 Samuel chapter 21. Now here's the interesting thing. This is the second psalm that is based upon this event in 1 Samuel 21. Psalm 34 also has this event as the background. So in 1 Samuel chapter 21, this is when David is again fleeing. Well, this is the beginnings of it, actually. He's fleeing from Saul. Saul has been trying to kill David. And so once we get to verse 10, which is where we're going to pick up, David thinks, I have an idea. I know where I might be able to find a place to get away. I'll go to the land of the Philistines. Right? The Philistines are our great enemy. Saul won't think to look for me there. So he says, if I can run away to the land of the Philistines, I'll get away there. And in fact, the place he decides to go to is Gath. And that's the city of the Philistines that he's going to make his way to. So, 1 Samuel 21, let's pick up at verse 10. It says, and David rose and fled that day from Saul and went to Achish, the king of Gath. And the servants of Achish said to him, Is not this David, the king of the land? Did they not sing to one another of him in dances? Saul has struck down his thousands, but David his 10,000s. And David took these words to heart and was much afraid of Achish, the king of Gath. So he changed his behavior before them and pretended to be insane in their hands and made marks on the doors of the gate and let his spittle run down his beard. Then Achish said to his servants, "Behold, you see this man is mad. Why then have you brought him to me? Do I lack madmen that you have brought this fellow to behave as a madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house?" This is a strange account. This is a very weird one at first. So again, mighty David, and that's the song, remember I've talked about, that's the song that's going around. That's the reputation he has. A mighty warrior. Saul, maybe he's mighty. He's killed thousands of Philistines. But David, he's killed tens of thousands. A mighty warrior. Well, he stands there in Gath, standing before this ruler, and he's so afraid. He doesn't know what to do. He starts to let the spit run down his mouth, and he starts to act crazy. So maybe they'll think I'm out of my mind, and they'll leave me alone. Right, this is like what we see in movies and television shows where people say, they're in court and they're going to say, "I'm going to plead insanity." Because they think if I plead insanity, then I get off easier. That's exactly what David's doing. He's acting out of his mind because he thinks that by doing so, he's going to get out of this situation. This doesn't sound like trust, does it? So back in Psalm 56, turn to back to Psalm 56. Verse 3, look at verse 3. Psalm 56, verse 3. David says this, "When I am afraid, I put my trust in you." So, okay, let's connect these dots, church. If you're afraid and you're in a situation where you don't know what to do, putting your trust in God means act crazy so you can get out of the situation, right? Well, if we're trying to put these two together, we have the background and we have the psalm, and we're trying to say, that must be the answer. No, obviously that's not the answer. God's not saying, yeah, acting out of your mind will get you out of situations. So where does Psalm 56 come from? In what way is David saying that he trusts God when obviously in this situation he wasn't trusting God? He wasn't being faithful. He wasn't believing that God would deliver him. He thought, I have to come up with something to get myself out of this. David feared. He feared. And his fear caused him to do something that was nuts. Doesn't fear often cause us to do things that are crazy? When we're driven by fear, we'll be illogical. When we're driven by fear, whether it's fear of, danger like David was presented to, or fear of the unknown, or fear of sickness, or fear of death, or fear of whatever else it may be, fear causes us not to think clearly. And that's exactly what happens to David in this situation. Here's something for us to remember, I think. As David is later on reflecting on this moment, he's recognizing that Psalm 56 is how he should have responded. Psalm 56 is reflecting on that moment. That's what he has in his mind as he sits down to pen these words. But he's able to look inside of himself, to reflect on that situation, to reassess it, and to say, I did not act the way that I believe. My words, my beliefs about God were not present in that situation. And again, we can all find ourselves in moments like that. And here's the beauty of life, is we have time to think about that, to learn from it, to reaffirm our faith in God, and to move forward from then on. Every moment in life is an opportunity for us to grow closer to God if we reflect upon it and actually learn from it. Right? Mistakes are the way that we learn. right? Messing up, screwing up, making everything go wrong. That's great if you learn from it. But if we keep making the same mistakes over and over and over again, then it becomes a waste. Then we're not learning from it. Then there is no growth. Then it does become meaningless. But David has a moment here where he can reflect on a situation and say, this is not what I believe about God, and therefore I should have said and done something different. This psalm is a reflection after the fact, a reflection and confession of who I should be, what I should do. David, like all of us, must spend time thinking about what he should have done, not because he can change the past, but because we are ever growing in our relationship with God. So here's how we're going to look at this morning. First, with the first 4 verses, we're going to refocus our vision. All right, when you have a camera and you look through it, if you have a big lens, sometimes you go, that doesn't look the way it's supposed to look. Or when you go to the eye doctor and they say 1 or 2, 2 or 3, 4 or 5, and you go, wait a second. Because what he's trying to do is, how can we get it clear? How can we refocus to actually see what needs to be seen? When we have a trial, or we have a problem or tragedy in front of us, that makes everything else go out of focus because we're so stuck on what's right there. And that's normal. But sometimes we have to refocus our vision and say, how can I look through this and look to God? So David tells us in verse 1, calling out to God in prayer, be gracious to me, O God, for man tramples me all day long. An attacker oppresses me. My enemies trample me all day long. They attack me proudly. So he's saying, I'm being oppressed, I'm being trampled. This is my problem. It's easy for us to focus on our problem. Right? It's easy for us to zero in on what the bad thing is. But the question is, what am I going to do about it? How can I actually know the right way to proceed? When David enters in and he sees the king of Achish and he's afraid, his focus is on his fear. And so his first thought is, well, let's act crazy. He doesn't think clearly for the moment. His mind is unfocused. What can I do? So in order to do that, I have to refocus my vision. When I was teaching in the martial arts school, and I would teach that at the charter school, we would learn self-defense, practical self-defense techniques. And one of the first things you have to teach somebody if they're going to learn how to defend themselves is to assess the situation. Right? If you have that as an opportunity, assess what is going on here, especially when I'm working with high school kids. Right? Because high school kids, when you're trying to teach them martial arts, you're trying to teach them self-defense, their answer is, well, they come at me and I punch them in the face, right? They just do that and punch, kick them. No. The first thing we do is try to see what is going on here. How can I get out of this? Because the best self-defense, do you know the best self-defense? Is not having to be there. The best block is not having to block, is to get out of it. I tell the students, you learn to fight so you don't have to fight. So sometimes when we put God before our eyes first, we see that this can be handled differently. We see that there is a different way out of this. Now, in terms of a lot of times when we have friction in relationships or we have arguments going on between people, sometimes we have to pause, refocus my vision, and say, how can I look at this differently? Proverbs 17:27 and 28 says this, whoever restrains his words has knowledge, and he who has a cool spirit is a man of understanding. Even a fool who keeps silent is considered wise. When he closes his lips, he is deemed intelligent. The proverb is saying sometimes the right answer is no answer at all. Sometimes the right answer is no answer at all. Sometimes we need to pause And maybe talk to God. Maybe spend time talking to God. Refocus my vision. Recognize, yes, there's trouble, there's oppression, there are problems, but I have to see past this and look to God. And so verse 3 and 4, this is what I wrote down. I wrote down this would have been David's goal. This is what David should have done in that instance. Verse 3, when I'm afraid, I put my trust in you. Verse 4, in God, whose word I praise. In God I trust, I shall not be afraid. What can flesh do to me? David's saying, that's what I should have done. I should have trusted in God. When I had that fear, that should have been a red woo light going off saying, you need to trust God through this. You need to call out to God in the midst of this. And one way that we do that, he says, I'm going to trust in your, verse 4, your word. In your word, I praise. Church, sometimes we have to refocus our vision by burying our eyes in God's word. God's word must be the lens through which we see our situations, through which we see our troubles. Because when we do that, we're trying to see the world through his eyes. As I refocus then, the next part is then I'm going to reassess the problem. I'm going to try to look at it a little bit differently. So how is he going to reassess this problem here? Verses 5 through 6. Verse 5, he says, all day long they injure my cause. Another way to translate that is they twist my words, or they distort my words. I'm not exactly sure what translation thing is going on there. I need to look that up because that seems like very different things. But he's saying, this is what they're doing to me. They're twisting my words. They're thinking evil thoughts about me. They're stirring up strife, or they want to cause me trouble. And then towards the end of verse 6, they've waited for my life. They just want me dead. Now maybe we don't have people that want to kill us in the same way that David is going through, but the sentiment may be felt. The sentiment may be felt. Do you feel like some people just wish you would go away? That idea may be felt. It may be difficult to get through. But when we think about these things, reassessing my problem, right? They twist my words. That's frustrating. Have you ever been talking with somebody and they're really against you, or they don't like what you're saying, and then they're taking your words and they're using them wrong? They turn them backwards. Or they're putting words in your mouth saying, but you are saying this, and you're saying, no, I'm not. That can be frustrating. Right? They think evil thoughts about me. Now, this is what he says, this refrain throughout Psalm 56 as well, is this idea of the fear of man. This idea that sometimes we actually fear man more than we fear God, meaning I care about what people say about me more than what God says about me. Or I want to please people more than I want to please God. I think Psalm 56 is David recognizing in his own situation that that's not the way it should be. People are going to think evil thoughts about me. I can't change their thoughts. People are going to try to twist my words and make me sound like I'm saying something that I'm not. Sometimes I just have to I'm going to be silent about that. Oh, it's really hard for me. I want to correct people when they're wrong. Sometimes I have to learn to keep my tongue from moving. She's laughing because she knows it's true. They stir up strife. Sometimes people are just going to want to be negative, and they're just going to want to fight against you. That's going to be hard. When we become more inclined to care about what people think than what God thinks, though, that's not a good place to be. Another proverb is helpful here. Proverb 29:25. 29:25 says this: the fear of man lays a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is safe. A snare is like a trap. So the fear of man is like a trap. It sounds good to try to be a people pleaser all the time, and I just want people to like me, and I want everybody to be okay with me. But eventually, that really is a trap. Because if we're following God, guess what? People are not going to like it. The fear of man lays a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is safe. Now, as frustrating and as difficult as some of these moments may be, when we reassess them in the light of God, in the light of eternity, we start to see that some things that we have worried about are of no value. Things that we've worried about really have no true value in the long run. Right? Sometimes we just need to be okay that people don't like us. Sometimes we just need to just forgive. We need to stop holding grudges. We need to learn to be radical forgivers. Sometimes we just need to not care what people think about us. Sometimes we just need to not engage with the fight. We just need to trust God. We have to reassess our problems, meaning this: does this really matter in the long run? In light of all eternity, does this argument really matter? Reassess my problems. David stood before somebody that he feared could take his life. So in his fear, he acted like he lost his mind. How many times did David experience before this and then after this that God was with him and gave him victory in battle? Why is it that when we know that God was faithful in the past, that we don't believe that he's going to be faithful now? What is wrong with the human mind that we forget so quickly? We forget so quickly. In fact, that's one of my very favorite Psalms. This is not my notes, so let's follow this bunny trail for a second. Psalm 106. In Psalm 106, this is one of those great, long, extended psalms that goes through just a kind of a summary of the history of Israel. And he's praising God. Let's see. So let's start with verse 3. No, verse 4. He says in verse 4, "Remember me, O Lord, when you show favor to your people. Help me when you save them, that I may look upon the prosperity of your chosen ones, that I may rejoice in the gladness of your nation, that I may glory in your inheritance. Both we and our fathers have sinned. We have committed iniquity. We have done wickedness. Our fathers, when they were in Egypt, did not consider your wondrous works. They did not remember the abundance of your steadfast love, but rebelled by the sea at the Red Sea. Yet he saved them for his name's sake, that he might make known his mighty power. He rebuked the Red Sea, and it became dry, and he led them through the deep as through a desert. He saved them from the hand of the foe and redeemed them from the power of the enemy. And the waters covered their adversaries. Not one of them was left. Then they believed his words. They sang his praise." They believed it, but, verse 13, "but they soon forgot his works." And that's how the rest of the psalm continues. I won't read the whole thing for you. God did this. He was gracious to them. He showed mercy. He showed his power. And they thought, wow, God is so good. But they forgot. Later on, they're like, who did what? Who, what? We do that same thing. We see that God is faithful in the past, and we praise him. We say, thank you, Lord. This is good. I praise you. Wow, look how amazing you are. And then time goes by, and we start wondering, is God still good? Or we find ourselves in a situation where we go, does God really care? But don't you remember that he was then? God does not change. He's faithful in the past. He's going to be faithful now. We have to remind ourselves of that. And church, this is why God didn't just send a prophet to speak words. He wrote it down for us because we need to remind ourselves over and over again who He is and what He has done for us. As a family, we've been reading through the epistles in the New Testament. We recently came to 2 Peter. And in 2 Peter chapter 1, Peter says, "It is good for me to remind you of these things." Why? Because we're so forgetful. Help us, God, to remember. Help us to remember. Last one is this. We refocus our vision, we reassess our problems, and then we reaffirm our hope. As David thinks about his situation, he recognizes that his hope is in God. Verse 7 in Psalm 56, he says, "For their crime will they escape?" Ask the question. The answer is no. "In wrath cast down your peoples, O God." No, justice does go served. God is a just God. We can trust that He's a just God. In fact, this idea of not worrying about the wicked, not worrying about what flesh can do to us, Jesus picks up on this in the Gospels as well. And in Luke chapter 12, beginning at verse 4, Jesus is speaking. He says this, "I tell you, my friends, do not fear those who kill the body, and after that have nothing more that they can do. But I will warn you whom to fear. Fear him who, after he has killed, has authority to cast into hell. Yes, I tell you, fear him. Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies, and not one of them is forgotten before God? Why, even the hairs on your head are all numbered. Fear not, you are of more value than many sparrows." Jesus is saying that same thing that David has here in Psalm 56. We don't have to worry about what people could do to the body. Yeah, I don't want to get hurt. I don't want somebody to hurt my body, of course. But I don't have to fear that. Fear God instead, he says. Fear God. Don't fear what man can do to you. Trust that God has you. God cares about you. I love when he says this, right? God, nothing happens to the birds apart from God. I have to remind myself of that sometimes because every spring I want to put a sign up that birds can read because this is a bad place to put a nest, but all the birds do it. Because every spring they put their nest all around this building, but it gets too windy up here. So those nests fall down all the time, and I just have to pick up all these baby birds that are dead, and I'm like, I get sad because of it. I try to help them, and they don't. And I picked up lots of little birds, and I try to put them back in the thing, and they fall down again. So just, if you see a bird, tell it, don't set up shop here. But I remind myself, I say, God, even the life of these little birds is in your hand. It is. Even the hairs on your head is numbered. They are. And Jesus is saying, God takes care of the birds, but he takes care of you more. He cares about you more. If he feeds the birds, if he dresses the world with beautiful flowers and creation around us, but he cares about you. You are of more value. He'll watch over you. He'll take care of you. Back in Psalm 56, David is reaffirming his hope. He's knowing, verse 8, he says that God is not aloof to my sadness. God is not aloof to my pain and my suffering. He counts my tossings. When you can't sleep at night because you're bothered and because you're rolling back and forth, he says God is counting your tossings. You're turning around in bed. Because he's not gone away. You're not alone in that situation. He knows what you're going through. He says, put my tears in your bottle. Even your tears are counted by God. He knows every single one of them. He's right there with you. He is near to the brokenhearted. He has not left you in those situations. David is reaffirming his faith. I should not fear, but I should put my trust in God. Right? He knows that in verse 9, then my enemies will turn back in the day when I call. He knows that ultimately God will take care of these problems. Why? I love this line in verse 9. This I know. What do you know, David? God is for me. Church, if you are in Christ today, if your hope is what he accomplished for you upon the cross, I can tell you without any doubt in my mind, God is for you. God is for you. Put your trust in him. Verse 10, put your trust in his word. He says it there twice. Whose word I praise. Whose word I praise. When God speaks, I'm going to listen. When God tells me what to do, I'm going to do it. When God says, trust me, I'm going to do it. When God says, be still, I'm going to be still. I'm going to put my trust in him. Why? Verse 11 again, a repetition. Because what can man do to me? There's nothing in this world that can ultimately do anything to me that's going to separate me from God. So I have nothing truly to fear. If my hope is in him, nothing can happen that's going to separate me from God. I can lose everything. I could lose all my money. I could lose my home. I could lose my family. I can lose the clothes off my back, but I will never lose my God. This is true hope. If we are in Christ, we will remain in Christ. God is for me. God's word is given to me. I will trust him. What can man do to me? What trouble could possibly come that God can't handle? The answer is nothing. So he ends here with verses 12 and 13. I must perform my vows to God. Therefore, God, I'm going to do what you tell me to do. I will render a thank offering to you. I'm going to worship you, God. And verse 13, for you have delivered my soul from death. You have delivered my soul from death, yes, my feet from falling. If I can trust God with my soul, with my life, with my eternal existence, then I can trust God in any moment in this world. And I will walk before him. That's what David says. I will walk before him in the light of life. These are the things that I know. God, I know you are good. I know you will not leave me in hard times. I know I can trust you, but sometimes I don't live like that. And David didn't live like that. When he acted like he was crazy in front of the king in Gath, he was not living like that. But later he reflected on that moment and he says, Lord, help me to grow from that. Help me to grow from that moment of mistrust. Help me to learn from it so I can plant my feet once again in your word and trust you. Help me. Help my unbelief. Help my disobedience. Help my wavering in the face of trials and pain. We sang it yesterday in what's the song? Come thou fount. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. I feel it. Prone to leave the one I love. Take my heart, take and seal it. Seal it for thy courts above. Guide me, God, because in myself I'm prone to wander. But I reaffirm my trust in you. And whether or not our country believes it, this is my confession of faith as it is right here in this word in verse 3. Or verse 4, in God I trust. In God I trust. That is our faith today. Whatever may come, in God we trust. Let's pray. Father in heaven, I praise you that you have blessed us even when we lack faith, even when we do not love you like we should, even when we don't trust you like we should. God, you're right there with us, and we praise you for that. So help us to trust you through tears and hardship and trial. When struggles come, wherever they may come, oh Lord, may we reaffirm our faith in you. May we refocus our vision so our eyes are directed on you, knowing that you're there for us and you care for us. That sin and death has been defeated once and for all upon the cross of Calvary, so we have nothing to fear. We have nothing to fear. Help us, O Lord, to remember that. Help us to remember that and to live like it. You are good, O God. We worship you and praise you. In Jesus' name, amen.